On this podcast, you'll find interviews with high-performing, successful individuals in life sciences. On a weekly basis, we cover their proven methods, principles, strategies, and mindsets to implement new technologies that scale to meet the needs of people in our world.
This episode of Life Science Success is brought to you by 5280 Life Sciences Consulting. If you need help setting your strategy, meeting your operational goals, or you are selecting and implementing critical technology in your business, we should talk. Visit 5280lifescience.com to schedule a meeting and find out more.
Today, I'd like to welcome to the podcast Christina DiArcangelo. Welcome, Christina.
Thank you so very much, Don. I'm so happy to be here today. Thank you for asking me to join your podcast and making time for me on your schedule.
I'm definitely looking forward to this conversation. Can you tell the listeners a little bit about your career? As I looked at you, it's interesting to see somebody that's a CEO, not of one company, but multiple companies and a charity. And it just seems like you have a lot going on.
Sure. Thank you so much. So I've been, whenever somebody asks me to talk about my background and my career and my profession, I'm always like, it's odd because I identify with being a clinical research professional. I've been globally in the biotech, pharmaceutical device, nutraceutical, medical cannabis, and CBD industries now 22 years globally. The last 4.5 years, I've been in the medical cannabis and CBD clinical research space. I opened up my nonprofit in 2015 that you alluded to called Affinity Patient Advocacy, which is basically was started because my dad had passed away at age 62 from stage 4 liver, lung, and stomach cancers.
Sorry to hear that.
Thank you. I don't mean to non-emotional when I'm very business oriented, but when I talk about this, because it's work related, I have a tendency to put that corporate shield on when I talk about that. But it was a very challenging time. From diagnosis to death, it was less than 2 months. He had his first bout at 40, which was prostate cancer. So he lived 22 years with cancer. And in the back of his mind, he always knew that eventually cancer was going to be the end-all be-all for him. There was a big family history on his mom's side of cancer, so my grandmother. And ironically, she had passed away in the same fashion that he did. So she had ovarian cancer. So he started with prostate. She had ovarian. They removed his prostate at 40. Which is very young. And then he had a small tumor in his stomach still that they treated for years. And that's what metastasized and ended up imploding all over his body. So it went into his liver, and then from his liver, it traveled up his esophagus into his lungs. And so when they figured out that he had relapsed and that we were in triple jeopardy because of the 3 different ones he had, they had gone down with a scope through his esophagus. And when they did, they tapped his esophagus with the scope and blew a varices. So for people who aren't clinical related, it's a vein basically that they blew. And so imagine a water balloon, right? You fill the balloon up with water, and it keeps going and it keeps going and it keeps going until a point where it cannot expand any longer and it bursts. Sure. So in my dad's instance, what happened was because his liver cancer was shutting his liver down, his esophagus wasn't able to generate the blood flow from his heart to his liver. So it's like concrete. When water hits concrete, it bounces. And so basically that's what was happening to him. So when they tapped his esophagus, although it was very light, it wasn't like they went in there like maniacs or anything. When they tapped it, he had a varice blow. And when that happened, it was like a cause and effect. More and more were blowing. And so before he knew it, he was being transported from the suburbs of Philadelphia to Thomas Jefferson University and dropped down medevac on the roof. He didn't even know that anything had happened until he woke up. He touched ground on the roof, and there's a helicopter guy and there's a pilot, and he's, I don't know what's going on. And they said, I'm sorry, Mr. DiArcangelo, but you're hemorrhaging, and we're not really sure what's going to happen. And so they brought him in and they started working on him right away. And 2 days later, he had all these diagnoses. And I just kind of sprung into action. I've been in oncology research for a long time, thank God. And I've worked in GI indications, gastrointestinal. I just basically did what I know. I'm not a doctor, as you from my CV, but I have really awesome people in my network that I was able to call and talk with and try and figure out if there was a study that he would meet inclusion-exclusion criteria. And that's basically how the premise for APA, Affinity Patient Advocacy, started, was because I just had to do this for him. He was my number one, and he was dying. And I wasn't so good about that whole fact of recognizing that he was dying, even though I knew he was dying.
Sure.
So when he died, it was like, oh my God, he's dead. And the next day I closed a deal for Affinity Bio Partners, my CRO. It was something I'd been working on, like literally 7 hours after he had passed. And then an hour later, after I did that, I was down at the funeral home working on his obituary and getting him cremated. And then literally 2 days later, I got a notice from the state that they had accepted my application for Affinity Patient Advocacy. So that company is really my passion company. Everything I do is about patients, but that one, that's for my dad, and it's in his honor. And I have a little boy who's now 7.5 going on 8, Christian. And he obviously grew up with my dad until he passed. And so Christian goes to a lot of the events and participates because it's his Pop-Ups charity. And we advocate for patients both traditionally as well as clinical medical cannabis and CBD patients.
That's fantastic. And thank you for sharing, your story. It's definitely, whenever cancer gets on that lymphatic highway, it can go pretty much wherever it wants. And it's a really unfortunate story for a lot of people. And having charities that sort of support people in the midst of that, because not everybody, I understand, has a network like yours or like mine, where I can reach out to a lot of people and start asking questions whenever I don't know something. And I look at people that have fantastic charities that can help cancer patients as amazing. So that's great.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And initially, that's all we did was work on cancer and cancer patients. That was our focus. And then when I got into the cannabis industry research-wise, people started figuring out that I was the same person, right? Because the CRO, it's an affinity company. I did all this on purpose with the branding. And so when they figured out I was doing the research, then patients started coming to me. And the only reason why we were in the closet, if you will, because that's what they call that in the cannabis space for the non-cannabis people out there that may be listening today. Basically, it just means that you're not forthright with the fact that you support cannabis initiatives. And in my case, the only reason why we weren't forthright was that when I first got into this 4.5 years ago, the IRS had put out a statement that said any companies that were supporting, especially charities, that were supporting cannabis endeavors, regardless if they were a grower, processor, plant touching, which is usually the divide for us, they would take my 501c3 status away.
Oh, wow.
And because I started that charity for my dad and his honor and his legacy, and my dad was a big rule follower. He was a Teamster. He worked for the Pennsylvania Turnpike Commission. He was very involved in politics. He really followed the rules. I didn't want anything to jeopardize that company because I was raised better than that. So we started helping people under the radar, of course, recommending CBD products. Eventually, when Pennsylvania became a state where we could get a medical card to have cannabis, we got involved in that. And we, about 2 years ago, came out of the closet and said, you know what, look, I've been testifying before councils. I've been down at the Hill lobbying for this. I'm not going to hide this anymore. I'm not doing anything wrong. And I'm a patient. I became a patient in 2018 when I got diagnosed with 2 autoimmune diseases. I lived my whole life pretty healthy, allergies and sinus problems. That was about it. And bronchitis and asthma and stuff. But when I got those autoimmunes, I started exploring in 18 CBG, CBN, CBD, and then later got my card in the fall of 18 because the pain was getting so bad and we couldn't figure out what was wrong. And that's how I got the second diagnosis. And so I was like, screw this. I'm not hiding this anymore. I believe in this as a medical treatment, not from a recreational standpoint. You will never see me with a bong. You'll never see me smoke a joint. Everything I do is medicinal value, and that's what I stand for. I have a hard line. And so then I was like, look, let's just come out. Let this just be, and let the chips fall as they may. And we work with the FDA on this stuff. And so it's, look, we're doing everything by the book. So if they're going to say something, let them say something.
Yeah, I definitely think that we're closer to seeing a lot of these things come to the forefront as well. Can you tell us a little bit about Affinity Bio Partners? And I guess maybe just start with, because there may be people listening that don't really understand what a CRO does. We just had an episode release from Timothy Sangster, who works at one of the CROs, but I didn't really have him go through this definition. So I thought that might be a good spot to start with you.
Sure, absolutely. So CRO stands for Clinical Research Organization. And basically what we do is we support biotech, pharmaceutical, device, nutraceutical, and then obviously the medical cannabis and CBD sponsors. So companies that sponsor research, that's what sponsor means technically in our industry. So what we do is we support them and their different initiatives that they're trying to do because they don't have internal resources or maybe the know-how to be able to provide that. And so the types of services we do traditionally, obviously clinical research and operations. So we're actually working on 3 COVID studies through Affinity Bio Partners, believe it or not. And it just came to us out of the sky, so to speak, one day in March. And we've been...
Well, as the virus got delivered, yes, I would imagine.
Yes,
so,
it was like historic, but not in a good way. So what we did with that trial, for example, is I actually wrote the protocol. I submitted to CDER, which is the FDA portal that you submit for your INDs, your investigational new drug apps, or your PIND. In the COVID case, I had been working with Dr. Shaw, who's on CNN. Everybody knows Dr. Shaw, to figure out very early on what pathway I was supposed to follow, because this was before they had put the task force together. And so I ended up filing a PIND under guidance of the FDA for the first treatment protocol. The time that I wrote that protocol and submitted it, it was March 30th. There were 169,000 cases worldwide. That was it. So it's obviously been very upsetting to watch the cases continue to go and grow and everything. And when we filed that PIND, obviously the FDA asked us for more information regarding preclinical, because a lot of people were putting things out there. They weren't doing preclinical. It was very hard to find COVID preclinical cells, by the way, in April, because it's not easy cell to be able to achieve, to procure from a preclinical lab standpoint. So we were effective in finding, thank God, from a sourcing model, we were able to find 2 preclinical labs. We ran 2 different studies against 2 different labs, obviously the same protocol, but we needed to make sure that we validated that we were finding efficacy. And so that first protocol is for 2 FDA-approved drugs that we are using, obviously off-label. They don't even look the same. They eventually, when we get down the pathway and we can release what these are, it's going to blow people's hair back, because when it came to me initially, it was something that was used for HIV and Ebola with the United Emirates. So we have actual data in humans with HIV and Ebola, where we saw that this treatment mechanism of these 2 drugs dropped the viral load. So that's something we're working on. And then we also have a non-traditional palliative care submission that we did for a product. I can't really say what it is, but just know it falls under nutraceutical, but it's not cannabis or CBD. And then there's a hand sanitizer. So that's a 510K that I'm working on that would be for hand sanitizer for dropping the disease if you come into contact with it by your hands. But then also we are working on a cleaning product for the actual hospitals and clinics and everywhere, that they can use that to clean, that kills the virus. So those are the three things that we're working on. That it's weird because they're all different things, but that's how my career has been. It hasn't been a cookie cutter pharmaceutical career where I've just stayed in a certain therapeutic area. I've been all over the world and all over different therapeutic areas. I didn't work on HIV. That was the only one that I haven't really worked on in my career. I've worked on flu mist, but I never worked on HIV. And then here this thing pops out of the sky, and we just took it and ran with it because we need to help people. We're at a critical juncture right now with COVID.
Yeah, I mean, well, and we definitely are at a critical point. We've got some sort of line of sight to drugs. We've got some line of sight to possible vaccines. We're at a really good point. The other day I pulled up the clinical studies tracker, and it said something like there's still over 3,000 things that are in the pipeline still progressing along, right, at different stages. Eventually we'll have quite a few things, and hopefully a lot of them are very effective against this thing, because as they talk about even vaccines, do you have to get vaccinated multiple times in a year? Is it once a year? Is it, I don't know, once in a lifetime? Who knows? But
what strand is it?
Yeah, right. There you go.
Because there's so many different ones, right?
Yeah.
And if we look at flu, because everybody can talk about the flu. We all understand the flu implicitly, right? You get the vaccine, you cross your fingers and hope that vaccine that you got for the flu season is going to counteract the actual flu that gets out there and into the world, and you're exposed. So that's what I'm curious about, is they're not talking about that. Which one is it that they targeted? Did they go after one of the originals? Because they've exponentially have gotten worse as they've mutated. Some of it that's out there right now that has COVID actually has HIV too.
Wow. Well,
so that's bad. Yeah. That's just, it's already bad enough with COVID. And then the other thing is, with all this, with the vax, is how long does it last for? Like you alluded to, do you have to take it, you have to get it 4 times a year? How long? And what happens to the patients that already had COVID and now they're vaccinated? How does this work? Are there measures being performed with respect to palliative care for this? Are they looking at any of that? Because COVID itself is terrible, but I think really what needs to be focused on is the palliative side, because these people end up dying later on because of the clots and all these other things that happen to their bodies. People get GBS. There's all kinds of stuff that's happening.
Yeah. Yeah, and just the extended sort of damage that it can do to your body, to your lungs, to everything else. It is awful, but it is something that we've been talking about for years. And I remember, if I think back to March, I would have never thought that we would see the sort of death that we're seeing and things like that. It's just not something that my mind could make the leap from where we were before COVID to now, and to know that so many people have been impacted. I'm going to switch gears a little bit on you, just have a couple of questions with regards to artificial intelligence. I've interviewed a few different life science companies now around artificial intelligence and ways that they're using it in cancer research and things like that. I just was curious. So I saw in your bio that you also have something that you're focused on, both artificial intelligence for, the traditional CRO side where you're working with pharmaceuticals, but also on the CBD side as well. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yes, we have 2 bots. They're buddies. And the reason why I call them they're buddies, like male, is because the logo for the Cannabot and the Dr. Bot is obviously a boy. It wasn't done to be goofy. It was just the way we designed the bot. It ended up looking more like a boy, in my opinion. Other people may think otherwise. I don't care what you call it. But as far as I'm concerned, they're brothers. And I say that because I have sister organizations with the affinities, because I'm a female CEO, so we call them sisters. So the bots are really actually very cool. They work on Google. And they also work on Alexa as an actual skill. Alexa, I don't want her filing. She'll start, if she hears those words, those guys, and then she'll know to turn it on. So I don't want her turning them on. So we originally developed the bots to ascertain data from the patients. And so we looked at this as like an ePro measure, so electronic patient reported outcomes. But then we also wanted to make sure that we are educating, especially in the cannabis CBD side, because there's a lot of misrepresentation, fallacies. There's all kinds of stuff that's out there that you can see in the media that there's people are doing all kinds of, there's a CBD craze where people are like putting lip balm on, taking a bath, taking a tincture, smoking it, eating the ice cream, drinking the water, drinking wine, having beer, everything with CBD in it. How do you know what's working, what's not working? Like, you have no idea. And what in the hell is lip balm CBD really going to do for you? It's not going to do anything. Maybe it'll help from a moisture standpoint, but I'm telling you, it's not really going to do anything. And that's based on my research.
Product marketing, not medicinal effect.
Popular. And that's one of the challenges I have being in the space. And so that was one of the reasons why we decided that the bots had to educate both Dr. Bot and Cannabot, was because a lot of these poor patients don't know what the heck is going on. They don't know what to take. They're naive. Not naive intelligence-wise, let me be clear. But in clinical research, we say they're naive. They don't take this every day. So that's what I mean. I don't want to offend people.
Sure.
That I'm being pompous, calling someone naive. I'm talking in a clinical term. But what we do with those bots, basically what we started originally was from an ePro, an educational standpoint. We have the capabilities because they are artificial intelligence bots. They learn as they talk to people. We are able to use the bots for patient recruitment. So to find patients and certain indications that are like trying to find a pink panda bear in New Jersey, we all know that doesn't exist, but we have to try and find them. We have the abilities to be able to use the bot for that. And we have some plans to do some other things from a clinical research standpoint with the bots. But we divided the bots in the same manner that my CRO works. There's a divide in between the companies because we have the cannabis CBD nutraceutical side, and then we have the traditional pharma side. So that's why we did that, because that's how we operate as a company.
Excellent. Can you tell me about patient healthcare and what you envision for patients overall and their treatment?
This is a good one. Thank you. So this is something obviously that's a topic of everyone's conversations, being the fact that we just had an election, right? And healthcare was massive on the radar for everybody, not just COVID, but just healthcare, the cost, how doctors are trying to work in a telemedicine fashion now. And just think about the clinical trials and we've had to do so many different caveats to do studies. I'm working on an MDD study on the traditional side of my company. And everything that we employed for COVID is just craziness. So all these lessons learned that we're having with COVID really makes you realize that you can do a lot more research electronically. We can consent electronically. We have tools to watch patients all the time to know what's going on with them. We have watches.
Sure.
We have the iWatch now that just came out, and I'm not getting paid for endorsements for Apple, just to be clear. I'm just talking about it as an example of a tool that collects biometrics. That's why I wear my iWatch, and I don't have the newest one. I think it's the 5, but it helps me as a patient to see if I'm active and all this stuff. But anyway, I'm a clinical person, so I look just like you are. So we look at this stuff, but the normal everyday person who's sick and tired does not know how to do this stuff. So how do we bring them to 2021? Right. Forget 2020. Let's just forget. It's a bad dream over there. Let's look forward to 2021. How are we going to get this done? So Spectral Analytics happens to be one of the companies I support. I know you've seen some of the press that came out about that. That's the first company I worked on for the COVID traditional study. However, Spectral Analytics is a nutraceutical biotech company. Oops. So Spectral really is a nutraceutical CBD company, and it's looking to plow ahead in that space to treat the patients where they are, because we both know that's not what's happening right now. And we're talking not just in the nutraceutical space, but also the traditional space where I've come from. So For them, I'm their chief clinical R&D officer. So I'm responsible for figuring out what studies we want to do, how we want to do it, how we're going to orchestrate it. And it's going to be a global endeavor. What we're doing is we're building out a telemed system, and we're going to be doing perpetual clinical studies. So constantly. So we're going backwards to go forwards. So if you think of how we know traditional medicine and drug development to be, is that you do the registry after you've done all the heavy lifting. What we're going to do is we're going to work with patients that are already been diagnosed with certain things, that are already seeing their favorite physicians. We have relationships with a lot of these different nutraceutical-based physicians because of the research we do. What they're going to do is they're going to ask their patients if they want to enroll in our perpetual study. So we'll have central lab kits. We're going to be doing gut biome DNA. There's all these different DNA tests that we're going to be doing. We're going to be measuring cortisol. A lot of people don't understand that if your cortisol levels are high, you don't absorb anything you take. Even vitamin C. If you pop a vitamin C in your mouth because you keep bruising or you feel a little, and you take a vitamin C, it will not penetrate your system if your cortisol levels are too high. Nobody measures cortisol. Have you gone to your doctors and they've asked you, hey, let's measure your cortisol because you seem like you're a little stressed out? It doesn't happen.
Never.
So that's what we're doing. We're trying to change medicine for the treating of the patients, but also in a cost-effective manner. See, that's where it really lies. We're not looking to get rich off of all these things we're doing. The COVID stuff that we're trying to do with this company will pay for the research that we want to do for these poor patients that have all these different things wrong with them, whether they're ADHD or PTS. We work a lot with veterans, all these different people who have all these different things wrong with them. We're looking to meet them at the road that they're at, where they are. Right now, we're at a crossroads a lot of time with medical care, right? Which way do I go to the specialist? Do I try this? Do I try this Chinese remedy? Do I do this? Do I take CBD? Do I try whatever? This is what happens. People start and they get online, they look up WebMD, they see side effects, they see drug interactions, they become alarmed. Their heart rate goes up, their blood pressure. Nobody's monitoring this, and they're not sleeping. This is a way for us to see everything. And we'll be using our tech platform, obviously. So we will really get to see what's going on with these patients. That's what the wave of the future is, in my opinion.
It's great to hear that some additional technology will also help not only the continuation of the studies, but also just show a complete picture of what the patients are going through. So that's excellent.
And thank you. And I think the FDA is going to be interested in this, right? I talk to them pretty regularly on the cannabis and CBD side, right? And now I've been dealing with this COVID crisis and dealing with even the White House, the first project. The White House knew about what we were working on, believe it or not. So I think that more we can educate them as well as to what expectations they should have in this space, because the nutraceutical space is an uncharted territory. Look at all the 483s that have come out. And for those of you that don't know what 483 means, that's a warning letter from the FDA. You never want to get a 483. So don't make false claims about your products that it's going to help with your headaches or whatever it is that you write down. And even your pets. You might think, oh, it's okay. It's Johnny's little doggy, Susie Joe over there, this little basset hound. Don't do it, because they're going to get you, and rightfully so. You're making profit. But anyway, so this will constantly educate them, what we hope is, and what they want. You see it coming out from the FDA. We want to have this education. So we're hoping that we'll do this on the non-traditional side, if you will. But then we're going to start pulling in the traditional clients that I'm working with through my CRO to come over here as well, to constantly be monitoring these patients once they're done out of this study, if you will, for a long-term follow-up standpoint.
It's great to hear. I do like to ask every guest the same 3 questions. So what inspires you?
I have to pick one thing. You know what? Honestly, it's just helping people. Patients, I grew up with sick. My grandfather was very sick. He had his first heart attack when he was 32 with a quad bypass. And so I always grew up with a sick papa, and he had all kinds of things wrong with him. And so I saw the struggles that my family had. And then I lost my grandmother when I was a freshman in college. So I've seen a lot of stuff happen to my family from a healthcare standpoint. So that's always what inspires me, is to help patients. But I also saw that modeled with my dad being a labor guy and negotiating contracts on the benefits of the people who belong to the union. So people was something that was very strongly instilled in me. And so it just makes sense. That would be what inspires me, because that's what I wake up thinking every day, is what am I going to do today to help somebody?
Thank you for that. So what concerns you?
The rising costs with the healthcare is obviously something that concerns me, and the treatment's not moving as fast as they could. I'm not saying we hedge safety and efficacy, but there's things that could go a little bit faster, and we have a lot of red tape. And so I've been trying to work with companies through my CRO that are nimble, that can pivot easily to get stuff done, because the longer we wait for things, the further behind we are getting an approved drug to market. And that's where it goes back again, full circle, to the patients, but also keeping the cost down for the patients, because they can't afford, especially right now, there's a lot of people in deficit.
Agreed. Yeah. And what excites you?
Oh, I just can't wait to see what happens with what we have planned in 2021 with all the stuff we want to do with Spectral, and even my CRO. We've got a new study coming up that's going to be a really big, groundbreaking study in the cannabis and CBD space that will show validity and efficacy and safety for the industry to show, because it's backed by pharmaceutical execs like myself. So that's a big one that I can't wait. I've been talking about this for 2 years. Like, it's finally here, and we're going to get it started in 2021, I
think that whenever you can see over the horizon and get excited about what could be coming, so that's a great answer overall. So,
and I'm going to start writing my book.
Great.
I'm writing a book. Yep.
Excellent.
So I launched my brand in July, like my personal brand, because I want to look at what's my future look like after I'm done what I want to do clinically and stuff. And with the patients, I always keep my nonprofit, but what do I want to do? And I want to do TED Talks. I want to inspire people, because I'm a blue collar kid. I'm self-made. Everything I have, I created. And anybody can. You don't have to. I'm not an Ivy grad. I went to good schools. Yes, anybody can achieve what they put their mind to if they have the right resources. And it's not always money.
Agreed. Yeah. So Christina DiArcangelo, thank you so much for being a guest on the podcast. I greatly appreciate you and your time and the overall story that you shared with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. I can't wait to hear when it airs.
Thank you for listening to Life Science Success. For complete details about this podcast, including show notes, how to get in touch with guests, and more episodes, please visit www.lifesciencesuccess.com. If there's someone you'd like for us to invite to the show as a guest, please let me know by sending me a message at the podcast website. Please click subscribe on your favorite podcast app, share the podcast, or tell a friend about it, and last but not least, rate the podcast. Thank you again.